Today is July 17th, 2012, and I am sitting with Mary Martin Carr in her apartment in West Des Moines. Mary, do I have your permission to talk to you today?
Yes, you do.
Good. You are a descendant of the Martin family that has a house on Lincoln Way in Ames, and that's one of the things that I'd like to talk to you about today. And I'm looking forward also to talking to you about growing up in Ames. First of all, for our purposes, we always like people to tell us when and where they were born.
Well, I was born in Ames in a little yellow house at 304 Washington in 1940. In about 1944-45, the war was still on. Our parents got permission to build a new home because that house was pretty small and the roof leaked for 2 parents and 8 children.
You said you got permission. That was interesting.
They had to get permission because it was wartime.
And supplies were limited, so
I'm
you had to
sure.
have
Yeah.
that permission. So if you were living in that particular location, you probably went to Lincoln School?
Yes. And during the time that our house was being built, we lived with our grandparents.
In the famous house on Lincoln
Yes,
Way.
in that home, yes.
Tell me about living in that house. Were they still? Well, first, their house is famous because why?
Well, they took in students because African American students had difficulty finding housing. So they apparently had them in, and I remember some. And then my aunt, Nell Ship, who was their daughter, and her husband, John, had women students at their house, I guess. And back in the day, families lived more together. So at one time, I can remember when their daughters lived in their home. But, we were blessed because we lived so close to family. We could walk to our grandparents, to aunts and uncles and cousins, as well as classmates. But
So when you started to school at Lincoln School, what was it like in the morning? Did you get up and fix your lunch and take it to school, or did you just go to school and walk home at noon? What
we
was
came
it like?
home for lunch.
Mm-hmm.
We came home for lunch.
So Mom was always there to fix your lunch.
Absolutely.
And you were one of how many siblings?
8 children. They had a son. Their first son died, but they raised 8 children. Yes.
When you went to school in the morning, what did class start like at Lincoln School? Did you have a Pledge of Allegiance? Do you remember it very much?
I don't think we said Pledge of Allegiance every morning. My kindergarten teacher, I think all of us had her, was Kate Mitchell, who was the school principal, and was famous for helping get students and parents connected during that 1918 epidemic. But she was an absolutely wonderful lady, and we all feel that way about her.
And of course, there's a school named for her now in Ames.
Yes.
And so you got to experience her.
Yes, she was wonderful, and a very, very vivid picture of her in my memory. But I remember kindergarten because we took rugs and we had a rest period. There was a sand table that we got to play in, and my best friend, the first week of kindergarten, and we had just moved back in. I was thinking we were at our grandparents' when I started school, but we had just moved back into the house. And she and her mother came and knocked on the door and asked if I wanted to go play. And we have been fast friends since. The families have been friends.
Mm-hmm. And that just came about because of the school relationship.
I guess so. She lived over on the east side at that time. And I guess she saw something about me, and God meant for us to be friends. and then they moved into our neighborhood, so we were still in the same school, but we were 2 blocks apart, and we marched together at graduation, and we talk on the phone every month or two for an hour or two.
That is a long-lived friendship.
It is.
Can you share her name?
Her name is Colleen Hines Kierkegaard. That's her married name, and they live in Arizona. But yes, her parents, and she has a sister, Janice. So we're friends. The family are friends.
When you got finished with school on a day, did you have a lot of homework, or were you just able to play? Or when you're one of 8 children, then sometimes it means you have to do a lot of chores.
Well, we probably didn't do as many chores as we should. But yeah, we played. We hung around home a lot. A lot of our amusement was with each other, because we weren't born with TV and microwaves and video games and stuff. We got our first television in 4th grade, and we were probably the first ones in the school to get one. And we used to, Gulliver's had a radio station on Kellogg. We'd walk by there and on Main Street, and you'd see TVs on, and we'd go, and there was a commercial. I want a television Christmas, a world of magic all my own. And we used to sing that. And one day we came home from lunch. We got it early. We came home for lunch, and there was a Philco table model sitting in the middle of the living room with the bed spread over it. And there wasn't much to watch on television back then, but and we had, for colored television, if you were silly enough to talk yourself into believing, they had pieces of plastic that had diagonals of red, green, yellow, and blue that you put over your screen. Like that was supposed to make anybody feel they were watching color TV. But we played outside a lot. And with our older siblings. My oldest sisters were wonderful babysitters. And
Did both your mom and dad work outside of the home?
our mother really didn't. She did a little day work for one lady, like a Friday afternoon or something, but we were blessed because we went home for lunch and she fixed lunch, and we had dinner, home cooked meals. She was a wonderful cook. They had big gardens which they shared.
Among the family, your family and
Our-
friends had big gardens in that area.
Yes, and my dad, we had a big garden in our backyard, and he would often plant somebody else's garden. He loved to garden, and so did she. We had lots of flowers.
You had mentioned that you were born at home, and you mean literally at home.
Yes, we were delivered at home.
Now, there was a Mary Greeley Medical Hospital at the time, so do you know why your mom chose home, or how did that work
Well,
out?
I think a lot of people did that.
Was it just maybe expense?
I'm sure that was part of it, and that's just what they were used to from probably as they grew up. I don't know. My mother was she and her twin sister were the oldest of my grandmother's children. And I'm sure my grandmother, all of her children were delivered at home. And I suppose, it wasn't as expensive back then, but people did not have hospital insurance. I mean, many people. My dad was essentially self-employed. He cleaned businesses at night, and because he was an industrious person during the day, he shined shoes at Bob Williams. So I'm sure some people thought that's how my dad supported his family. But no, he was very industrious and he cleaned many buildings at night. And Mom helped with that, and sometimes would go help too. And they cleaned the Collegiate Manufacturing Company. And we would go there on Saturday mornings and help. And we loved to get an ice cold Coke. But, you know, it was...
And that was, the building was on where the Octagon is now.
Yes,
Sorry, just for people's reference to know where it is now,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And so if you were cleaning that, lots of fuzz and lots of felt.
Well, felt and cork and stuff, but... And we talk about that frequently, and my sister this weekend was saying how she'd love to do that. But, you know, we were with our mom. Mm-hmm. And we didn't have to go. We went because we wanted to. And, you know, many people back then did not have cars. And I don't mean just people in our neighborhood, because we grew up in a nice neighborhood. Some people like to slam the South Side, but there was nothing wrong with the South Side. But anyway, people didn't have cars, you know, in the 40s and the 50s. We weren't as affluent. I hate to use that word with the politics of the day. But anyway, you know, people borrowed parents' cars, or like my friend, her dad used to drive his father's car. When she and her mom came to pick me up for the first time, they came in a Model T or a Model A or something. I don't know if that was theirs or her. And then one time I rode in her grandfather's little car with a rumble seat, so I had the privilege of riding in a rumble seat. But you know, people had a hard time then. It was post-war.
Right. So I'm thinking about grade school years, and we can always come back to it if you have some other memories, but I'm going to jump ahead a little bit to high school. I was talking to an Ames Historical Society curator, Dennis Wendell, who also happens to be a friend of both you and me, and he showed me some things from your high school. I saw a blue ribbon for the Girls Athletic Association volleyball.
Well, as I was saying, much of our entertainment was playing outside and going to the playground at Lincoln School, and they had playground in the summer, and we walked everywhere, including when we went to Carr's pool. And we had...
I'm going to interject for just a second. That was a long walk.
It was, but we were used to it. I mean, you know, you walked...
That's several miles.
Oh, yeah, but
Yeah.
you walked everywhere.
I broke your chain of thought. I'm sorry. It was about volleyball.
We had Girls Athletic Association. And so I participated in that. And we played basketball and different things, and after school.
At that time, though, Ames, you did not have the opportunity to compete against other schools.
No, that was not a thing heard of for girls.
And I think Dennis had mentioned also that, I mean, you were on the council for Girls Athletic Association as well. The group that
I might have been one year. If you didn't have those yearbooks, you wouldn't remember that.
What else did you do in high school? What other activities?
Well, we sold Christmas wreaths and sprays for girl reserves. And I was going door to door in our neighborhood, and this petite little fair-skinned lady came to the door, and I said, "Is your mother home?" And her husband came up behind her and said, "What is it?" And she was very pregnant. And I was so embarrassed. And of course, they did not buy anything from me. But I babysat, I detasseled corn, I worked at the hospital in the summer, and And so in high school, I was busy. I spent a lot of time with aldermans, and Mary Alderman is a Tyrannus, and they were just close friends, and so you spent time with friends.
But you also got good grades.
They were acceptable.
You studied. You like science.
Yes, I did.
Yes.
I did better in the sciences. I'm not a math genius, but I like science and I like history and geography.
Ames High now is much more of a multicultural high school than it was when you were there.
Yes, absolutely.
Describe for people who are accustomed now to a multicultural situation in Ames. What was your high school class like? Can you describe it to me in that context?
Well, most of the black people in Ames at that time were related to us. Some of the other black families, their children were older and gone. And the Tyrannus family. Other than that, I mean, there weren't many people of color in this community. And
was that hard in terms of just maybe your own cultural traditions, finding food that you would be comfortable with, and doing your hair and that sort of thing?
We ate the same thing that the rest of you ate.
Yeah. No, I'm just saying I have friends
I know.
who said that they moved to town, and their southern tradition of things that they wanted were not available. That kind of thing.
And my father's family came to Ames in, we think, 1913.
Right.
And my father was born in Georgia. And I mean, my mother, I mean, we had fried chicken, but we had roast, and we had steak, and we had fish, and I mean, yeah, she cooked. We used to go pick wild greens, and she made some kind of fried cornbread that Dad liked. I never cared for it, and none of us can make it. But I wouldn't say food-wise, no, that wasn't an issue for us. And we didn't eat out a lot. I mean,
no one did at that time.
No.
Right.
And, but, there were subtle,
differences that you had to deal with?
I suppose there were subtleties. I played with my friends at their homes. When I was in first grade, a new girl came to town, lived in our neighborhood. And we liked each other and wanted to play together. But somebody said, I heard some people on television talking about a book or something, when did you first know you were black? And I thought, well, that's when race really entered for me, because she was talking about it, and I said, well, you're not white, or you'd be the color of this paper, and I'm not black, or I'd be that color. But we wanted to play together, and her parents were bigoted. And one time she came to my house to play, and we're playing outside, and these other two friends, my best friend and another friend, were playing together, and they went to Carol's house to ask her mother if they could borrow her bike. And she said, isn't Carol playing with you? No, she's at Mary Martin's house. And Carol's mother sent Mary Jo to call Carol home, and she got grounded for 2 weeks. And then one time we were going to go, Carol and Mary Jo and I, because we were going to go to the high school to see Aladdin's lamp on a Saturday morning, and I walked down to Mary Jo's, and here came Carol and her mother into Mary Jo's, and I'm standing on this big old front porch, and Mary Jo comes out, and she's stubbing her toe, and she said, Carol can't go, and she wouldn't look me in the face. And I said, okay, it's because I'm going, isn't it? And so she didn't say anything, and I just went home. And, you know, one of my sisters said when things happened to her, she pulled in, but I just got stronger. I can overlook things, and I can also stick up for myself and other people when I need to. But my best friend and Mary Jo, we had our Lincoln School reunion a couple of years ago. Of course, they didn't remember that. But, you know, and Carol's mother was either our campfire leader or our bluebird leader for a while, and then they moved. But her father was an officer with the Naval ROTC. And that old song from South Pacific, you have to be carefully taught. But and there were some issues around Carr's pool. My brother and cousin said that we weren't supposed to swim in the afternoon and evening, but I went out for lessons in the morning, but they would dart around the pool. Well, I do know that if some people in Ames knew that, they would not have liked anything like that. And you know, one of my friends said her mother didn't want her to. We were in high school, we were in the same homeroom. And I will use, I'll say associate or be with me. And I said, well, we were only friends at school. And she thought that she walked home with my best friend and I. I don't recall that, but this person and I are good friends today. We talk on the phone too. And that person also comes from a minority group, and they had derogatory things directed at them because of their faith. And it amazes me how people who experience bigotry can be bigoted. But that was not her mother. That was not her. But I didn't know that her mother had said that to her until a few years ago. But you know, we played with our siblings and the friend. Now we had bigots in our neighborhood. They were probably most of our neighbors were bigoted, but we coexisted peacefully together. And one family, their mother and our mother became the best of friends in our families and still are today. And my mother would not fight with people over kid stuff. You know, we played in our own yard. We had some very lovely neighbors too, but
so I hear you saying that there were influences, but I also know your life path that suggests to me that you had resilience, and it also suggests to me that I don't know the life paths of all your siblings, but it seems to me that you apparently learned from these sorts of things, and then it just became a part of you in how you worked your life path through.
Exactly. You can't let it get to you, at least for very long.
Well, let's talk about high school just a little bit more. So you were in the Girls Athletic Association, and I saw several ribbons about that, and I know, I understand it. Of course, you like science.
That was volunteer.
That was volunteer. And your high school was in what is now the City Hall, and it was central. Can you tell me just a little bit about high school then?
We loved Ames High. We had wonderful teachers in grade school, junior high, central, and Ames High.
And so you feel they treated you well?
Yeah, there were one or two that
not so well
were jerky, but I mean, they didn't treat us badly. They just said things they shouldn't have. My daughter probably experienced a little more ugly than with a couple teachers when she went to Welch. than we did growing up. But you know, I think everybody, you find your own group of friends.
Of course.
And we were protected. I mean, you know, there, and I remember being, when I came back to Ames in 75, and I was in a Bible study with some ladies from the church that we had grown up in, and one of them lived in our neighborhood, and we know she was a bigot, and she said, "Mary, we like your family, we know you, but these other people coming to town." Now, to me, that's a good illustration of life and people, regardless of what your skin color is. You choose people that you have things in common with. But you also treat people respectfully.
So there were teachers that were good. You loved Ames High.
Our teachers were wonderful, and I say they were our friends, and I said, I don't mean play friends. They cared about us. We respected them, and they respected us. And Mr. Adams was our school principal. Did you have him too?
Just 1 year.
Okay.
He had a long career.
He was a wonderful man too. So professional. He was around and about, but he didn't say a lot. At least, I mean, you know, but he, and his son Steve taught my daughter at Welch. And he was a blessing to Kim when some other teachers were not. And
so you graduated from Ames High, and you knew that you liked science. I know that you had said that you'd kind of worked at the hospital a little bit in your growing up years. Where did the idea of the medical field kind of come into play for you?
well, that's my calling, because the only other thing I ever considered was horticulture, and my dad was disappointed that I stuck with nursing, kind of. I used to read Sue Barton's Student Nurse. Do you remember that book? So I said when I write my memoirs, it might say Mary Martin, bedside nurse, because I like bedside nursing. But it was my calling. One of my older sisters is also a nurse, but my choice had nothing to do with hers or hers with mine. I didn't know she was interested in that and she had worked at Mary Greeley in dietary for about 3 years after she was graduated from high school. And then she went to nursing school, and
now at the time that you graduated from high school, 3 of the strongest career opportunities for women were secretarial, nursing, and teaching. And so I thought maybe that might have played into it, but I'm interested that horticulture was a possibility for you.
Well,
I know your dad was a gardener. And
yeah, I love plants and stuff too, but I'm not very smart about them. I think the reason I thought about horticulture was going to a Visha open house, probably. I recall that, but...
Well, usually there's some, I respect that you said it's a calling, but typically there's something, there's a hinge, there's a door hinge that makes you go one way or another, or there is a life event, or did you have any of those tipping points that really pointed you towards nursing?
No.
No, you just knew it.
I don't think so.
Did you take care of dolls and you enacted nursing as a child, or?
Not really. We had dolls, but I didn't. Not in that sense.
Well, I'll respect it. So now you're.
Now, when I worked at the hospital, they had that work program, and so we worked as little aides or whatever, and spent time in different departments for one semester. But I worked in dietary during the summers and some after school, and Sue Champlin was one of the big nursing people there, and very encouraging, and Miss Holcomb and some of the other well-known names. See, I'm old. Anyway, they were encouraging, but
How did you choose a medical institution? How did you choose what institution for your nursing degree?
I applied to one school, which is not probably very smart. And I probably would have applied there, but that's where my sister went. And not being Catholic or Lutheran and at the time there, you know, the 3-year program was affordable. Today it would be a lot more expensive because we worked our way. We provided service for education.
I also understand that you got a scholarship.
Yes, for the Story County Tuberculosis Association, and my sister had too, and I'm sure Sue Champlin was instrumental in that. Yeah, it was for $1,000, which went a long way back then.
That's significant. So Iowa Methodist School of Nursing.
Right. Wonderful education.
Tell me about where you went to class. First of all, you had to get some more science before you could be in the hospital.
Well, we went to Drake the first year, and we had anatomy and physiology, and we had to dissect these nasty cats. We had psychology and sociology, pharmacology, bacteriology.
So you were alongside the science majors at Drake University.
Well, the classes were taught there. There were at least 2 other schools of nursing. Okay. I don't remember which ones went there because Broadlands had a school of nursing, Methodist, Lutheran, and Mercy, and they were all very fine programs. So our classes were taught to nursing students. The big lecture halls, and then we had labs and in smaller groups and with schedules and stuff. And we went to Drake for Methodist in taxis.
You went in taxis?
Yes, we rode taxis out to Drake.
Where did you live?
In the dormitory, just north of the hospital. It was a big old Victorian house in the front.
Does it still stand?
No.
No. Okay.
They built a new dorm on that site, and now the school is closed, and it's used for education and different things.
Okay, so there's this big old Victorian, like a Queen Anne with a wraparound porch and all the bric-a-brac on it.
Well, similar to that.
Similar, yeah.
And then there was another dorm south of the hospital. There were 2 dorms.
So you got to go to the mansion.
Yeah.
But I bet it wasn't air conditioned.
No, but I was in the lowest level. I guess you could call it a sub-basement, basement. You could walk out the back fire door, and there were windows that were kind of, because we saw a window peek or 2 a time. But yes, I don't remember being hot, but the hospitals were not air conditioned. If you were lucky, a private room might have an air conditioner, and we talk about that because I don't know how people got well. And our uniforms, we had to put them together, and the collars and cuffs were very stiff and scratchy.
And starched.
Yes, and we would put a silk scarf around our neck to keep it from chafing. But it was hot. And I remember one time showering and powdering up with some, and I got over, and this woman says, "Oh, your perfume is making me sick." And I didn't wear perfume. We were taught not to. And I could not go back and wash and change. So I just had to kind of, and I remember that very well. And I have allergies, and so scents used to bother me a lot. And I think about that in relation to that. But
you had to really sacrifice your personal comfort because for the care of your patients, you couldn't use the powders and such just because, but it was so hot. And a starched uniform, goodness.
We weren't used to air conditioning, though.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Right.
what we have to remember. We weren't used to it because when most homes didn't have air conditioning. And you'd go I remember going into Yonkers on Main Street, and it would be so cold when you'd come out, you could hardly catch your breath. And we weren't, when we were growing up on our grandparents' front porch, Lincoln Way was the main highway, and we'd sit on that porch and count license plates, and people would be riding with the windows down, and sometimes their feet would be sticking out the car. People didn't have air conditioning when they rode across the country. We weren't used to it.
Mm-hmm.
Now we can't stand it without.
Indeed.
I hope we never have to do without it.
So you're in nursing at Iowa Methodist, and under conditions that would be different than what medical personnel experience now. Starch collar, hot days, cold days, taking a taxi to school. I suppose they wanted to make sure you were safe.
Oh, I think it was just getting us there because it was not a walking distance.
Mm-hmm.
And there weren't, remember the buses back then weren't, it was just a different time.
Right.
And people didn't have their own cars. Some might have, the last 6 months, you couldn't be married and go to school. Some people could get married the last 6 months. And you weren't supposed to drink, and that could cause you to get kicked out of school if you got caught. And it was a different time.
Mm-hmm. Did anybody ever get expelled in your classes? Do you ever recall?
Yes, there was one person who she would go to Drake in her pajamas with a trench coat over it. And she would go out and drink and come in and be intoxicated and sick and stuff, and everybody was hoping somebody would tell on her, and finally somebody reported her, and I think she had been probably kicked out of a few other programs. I think her parents had a lot of money, and we were recalling her at our 50th class. And some people dropped out for other reasons. Scholastically, one of the top students in our class, and she was our class president, and she dropped out after the first semester, and she became a lawyer and a judge, I think, and then she went out east and was teaching in a law school. And so, people...
Different reasons for choosing a different path. So, let's see, we're talking about uniforms, too. I was interested in, that's when people wore caps. Nurses wore caps. And that was quite, that's part of it was a badge of honor, and it was...
it was a promotional thing.
Yes.
After in February of the first year, we got our caps and had a capping ceremony. And then when we became juniors, our second year, we got a thin stripe. And at the beginning of our third year, we got another thin stripe that designated your level. And then upon graduation, we got a wide black band and a pin. And they presented us with a rose when they gave us our diploma. And
now, those caps were also starched.
Yeah, we starched our own. Now they're pre-starched.
How'd you do that?
Well, you made a really thick paste and slapped it on the mirror until it dried, and then you peeled it off and folded it.
So you had to be sort of have fine motor skills and to have a craft instinct to get that just right.
Well, it was, as you said, a badge of honor. We actually folded them, winged them more than we were supposed to, because they were supposed to be a little more square, but we winged them. And yeah, and then now, they would get in the way today, and a lot of people still have trouble. Oh, and I can remember one nursing home I worked in, and the administrator says, "Mrs. Carr, people wonder why you don't wear your cap." Well, there they want people to tell who you are, but today they'd just get in the way of equipment and stuff, and then with men they don't wear them. And
so you graduated maybe 1961 from nursing then? And take me on a quick career path just to get us back to Ames. Where did you go and to get back to Ames?
Well, our mother died unexpectedly. My first job was to be at Methodist on gynecology, and our mother died unexpectedly, and it was very traumatic. And my youngest sister was just starting her senior year in high school, and my oldest brother and sister still lived at home, but Pauline came home for lunch, Marie came home for lunch, and I love my mother a lot, and I was very close to her, so it was very traumatic. And so I came back to Ames, and when I applied for the job at Mary Greeley, I'm going to be irreverent, there was an old maid army nurse by the name of Florence Edbrook. And she said, "Oh, I suppose you have to come home to help your dad." And I said, "Good heavens, no. If people thought that, he wouldn't let me come." And then I later found out that she had asked people if people would object to working with me. And there were some other little digs, and there was another nurse, and I wanted nights, and they put me on evenings because that's all they had, and then and I had gotten, just before I got married, they put me on nights without asking me if I still wanted to go to nights. I guess they thought they owned me. And anyway, there was a night nurse there who was terrible. She picked at me. And other people saw it. I didn't say anything. I just thought, okay, if this continues, I don't have to stay here. That she didn't like anybody. She didn't like Catholic. She didn't like Dr. Sun because he was Asian. She didn't like herself. She didn't like her husband. One of those. And, but anyway, so I did get married. We went to Cedar Rapids for a couple of years, and then we went to St. Louis, where Virgil went to graduate school, and then we went to Omaha, and after Omaha we went to Highland Park and Glenview, and then I came back to Ames when my husband and I separated. And then I went to I went to Broadlawns for about 8 months. And I enjoyed that because I worked in urgent care, primary care, and did some work with the homeless outreach program. And then I went to Texas for a couple of years, and then I came back to Methodist. So I ended where I started. But along the way, I taught in some nursing programs and worked with Head Start and got to do... I had a good career, a varied career.
You did have a long interval with McFarland and Mary Greeley, correct me if I'm wrong on this, in terms of rehabilitation nursing.
Yes, I worked at Mary Greeley for about 2.5 to 3 years as a new grad, and then when I came back in 1975, I worked at Mary Greeley for 25 years. 20 years. From 75 to 75 to 95.
Right.
And so I was it was medical surgical nursing to begin with, and I was head nurse, and then we changed titles and stuff, and then nurse manager, and then along the way we became med surge, but we were not rehabilitation, but we were still medical surgical and rehab. So yeah, I over half of my nursing career was at Mary Greeley. It was not all easy, believe me.
It wasn't easy.
No. I experienced some bigoted stuff there, and you have to. When I shared some stuff with some colleagues, they said, "What did you say?" And I said, "Nothing." This one person, she said, "Hand me my nigger," and I looked at her, and I didn't know what she was talking about. She said, "Hand me my nigger," and then she picked up her remote control to the TV and said, "I call it that because it's black and it does my work for me." And so when I told my colleagues that, they said, "Well, what did you say?" And I said, "Nothing. She's had a stroke." I mean, you cannot. One time this one woman was in the nurse's station, and her husband had had a stroke. He was a veterinarian, and they were retired and moving to Atlanta at the time of the Olympics there. And she said that her children said whatever the initials were for the transit system that was going in, that it stood for moving Africans rapidly across Atlanta. And then she said that wasn't very nice, and I said no, it wasn't. And I mean, you just have to, when people are patients, you cannot respond to everything. You have to show that you're made of better stuff, and I am a Christian, and I experience stuff in the work world too, and there are some people that just like to pick at others, and they have to stand before their maker one day, just like I do. But there were things, and
you said, though, that it seems to me that you have had a pattern of resiliency.
yes, but when it was time, I knew it was time for me to leave Mary Greeley, and that last year I was there, I said, "Lord, I want out of here." Mm-hmm. And I don't care if I have to have a stroke to do it. And I'm working on, most of our rehab patients were stroke patients. But, the door opened and I left. Mm-hmm. I liked the doctors that I primarily worked with on rehab.
They wrote nice recommendations for you. They liked you.
Well,
maybe.
Yeah, I mean, when I see people that I worked with, there are only one or two that, but reorganization in the nursing department and some things are going on. I think Mary Greeley is very political. And somebody said, "Well, all hospitals are." Well, maybe I was more familiar with the inner workings. I don't know. I think it's very political. Mm-hmm. And I did not find that so much so other places where I worked. But I believe in doing your job and taking care of patients. And everybody doesn't work that way. And so I do what I'm called to do, and I say what needs to be said, and I'm not lazy, and I'm not unkind, and I always help people. Sometimes the aides would come and get me to help with their patients when the nurse assigned to that patient was out smoking or talking on the phone. And when I first met Alan and his wife, and she came in, and he introduced us and mentioned that I was, or had been, I guess, a nurse manager. And she asked me what kind of a nurse manager I was, and I wasn't sure what she meant. And then she said, "Well, were you a battle axe?" And I said, "Some people thought so." And I always remember. But, when I took the job as head nurse when I came to Mary Greeley, I did it to influence the practice of nursing, and I think I've had a positive influence from working with some of the people I worked with, and I felt that way about
On many levels. On many levels.
and I felt that way about the people that were a part of my education.
And so when you left Mary Greeley, you found some other employment.
I went to Broadlands for about 8 months, and at that time there weren't full-time jobs for nurses, and I worked part-time. And then I called a friend who used to be with Mary Greeley, and he said, "Oh, we need nurses," and he gave me the name of the head of the human services department there, and within 2 days I had a ticket, and they flew me down there, paid my expenses, including my gratuities, rented my car, and helped with my expenses, and I'm glad I went, because it made me appreciate Iowa that much more. I wouldn't want to live in Texas, and it was hard for my daughter and for me, but I stayed there 25 months, and then I came back to Methodist.
You have given a lot to a lot of people, Mary Martin Carr. You have influenced a lot of people. You've definitely had a really strong career at a time when you could have backed away and you could have just said, "I'm not going to be resilient." So you've given a lot.
Well, and I got a lot back, and nothing worth doing is easy. And I came from family who were resilient and worked hard. I used to say to people, if you agree to do a job for 50 cents an hour, then do your best at it. And if you don't want to do it, move over and let somebody else do it. And as a person of color, we always learned that we had to do things 10 times as well to be recognized as equal, and I think that's very true. I think...
Your parents must have put a high value on education.
Yeah, they did, because they didn't get to have education. My mother and my father only got to go to 8th grade, as many people back then did, and my grandparents, yes, they did, and they also had strong work ethic, and they were people of faith, and we were taught not to use people and take advantage of people. And
all good lessons.
Yes, and there's so much trickery anymore in what people do, and getting ahead, and I tried to do my job. I feel like I was a good and faithful employee, and I think you have to respect your employer, your bosses, etc. And when you can, it's time to move on. And when I left Mary Greeley, I needed to get away from the person that had become my supervisor. And anyway, it was good for me. I got to do some other things, and I'm glad I did. And then I came back to... Well, I guess I met Farwell when I was still working at Mary Greeley, and then I met Dennis and Alan and many of those, including you, who volunteer with the Historical Society. So you're part of my family. It's a blessing. I can't say enough good things about the people that are carrying on Farwell's mission, but
I'm talking with Mary Martin Carr, and we are continuing a conversation. She is a descendant of Archie and Nancy Martin, who had a noteworthy rooming house on Lincoln Way for African American students who were not able in the 1910s to 1920s, maybe into the 30s. They could not find housing at Iowa State.
Yeah, actually, they came in 1913, so
Okay.
I would imagine it was more in the maybe 30s to 40s. I'm not sure.
Okay. So there is now a dormitory at Iowa State University named for your grandparents. Tell me stories that you know about your grandparents and why you feel that's really neat. I'm assuming you think it's neat that there's a dormitory in their honor.
It's a wonderful thing, and when we right now our society is so bigoted. Bigotry is on the increase. And so I talk about my grandparents in that dormitory that is named for them at Iowa State, and the Ames community who helped to bring that about, because that started with, I don't want to leave any names out.
That's okay.
But I'm just saying that some people who saw the peer program and thought there should be one honoring our grandparents. And then they started a Martin Foundation, and then it progressed to the dormitory and getting the house on the historical. And
there's a certain irony here that African American students could not get housing on campus, and now there's a house named for your grandparents. But that's part of our history, I guess. That's just...
Yes, and the good people of Ames. I mean, that would not happen without Ames citizens. Our city leaders, our historians, our university.
Because I think the president at the time, Greg Joffrey, was quite supportive of that.
Yes,
he was a good leader in that regard.
And Dr. Tom Hill, and Dr. George Jackson was over. I mean, and then we had other people, many people. We don't want to leave anybody out, but it is a testimony to our diversity. But my grandparents were, they didn't have education. They were born into slavery. And
do you know the story of how they got to Ames or why they picked Ames?
Well, my understanding from my sisters is that my grandmother came to cook for the first woman doctor in Ames, who also, her husband was also a doctor. I didn't realize it. And I have a picture of them somewhere, but that's what my understanding was. And then I think she cooked for, I don't know, sorority, fraternity, or whatever. But I think I suppose that they probably met her in the South, and I don't know. We were wish we had asked more questions. I was in second grade when my grandmother died, and she was 92 or something like that.
But do you remember going to her house? If she was a good cook, you might remember her cooking, or...
Well, by then she didn't
she'd be
really
elderly,
cook
yeah.
for us, but yes, we lived there for about 3 months while our house was being built, and we were well behaved. We were not noisy, but everything was very neat and in its place, and Grandma was the stern one, and Grandpa was a little softer. But they weren't mean, but
So Grandpa might have liked, he liked to hum or sing, or if he was a lighter spirit of kind of person.
Well, after Grandma died, I can remember Grandpa walking over to our house, and I don't think he necessarily even came in. I remember once Mom was in the garden, and he always wore his hat and his suit coat, and he used to sing this song, "Oh, have you seen the Muffin Man?" And I think many of us remember that. And they had a back porch that was smaller but enclosed, so when we would come up through the backyard, he'd often be sitting on that porch. And of course, he lived longer than she did, so we had more time with him. He was almost 103 when he died, so he died in 1960, I think.
Does he have any stories, or they might have been painful? Did he ever share what it was like to have been a person in the South, born under circumstances that are inhuman?
I think that the older grandchildren, because the ship's kids were older, my dad didn't get married till he was almost 35, so their children, and Mildred Ship Crouch, seemed to have more recollection, and as she shared some stories, I wish we had written more down because it's hard to remember. And my aunt was talking about how during the days of slavery, remember people of faith, and the Lord, the Holy Spirit, told one of them to take a message to one of the women to take a message to the slave master, and she said that he would beat her, and she was told by the Holy Spirit, as fast as he puts it on, I'll take it off. And this got repeated 2 or 3 times, I guess. Well, she took the message to the slave master, and he did beat her. And I don't remember, and then my aunt said that the children were, and I don't know if that was my grandmother's mother or who it was, I just don't, but their children were all sold from them, and they were told that their children would be gathered back to them like a hen clucks their chickens. And my sister said that's scriptural. But again, people of faith. A couple of my grandfather's brothers were Methodist ministers. But anyway, and they were all gathered back, but they never saw the husband again. And we don't know what happened to Grandma Martin's father, Jake Candler. They changed the name.
Interesting.
But yeah, and you know, I know they talked about some of the mean things that happened to the slaves, as far, I mean, you know, if they tried to run or something, they'd amputate a foot or a leg, or
Indeed.
It was ugly. I mean, you know, and it's
so your grandfather lived to age 103.
Almost 103.
Almost 103. And it looks like you have some good genetic code there. You may live long yourself, Mary Martin Carr.
I don't. My dad's sister lived to be 103. My dad had a half brother who lived to be, I think he made it to 103. My mother's father was 100.
I hope you have as many years as well.
Well, I'm looking forward to getting to glory when the time comes, but I will try to be of service while I'm here. I gotta be around a while because my kids need me, but you know, the important thing is to use your time here well. Make a difference.
Thank you very much for talking with me today. I really appreciate it.
Well, I thank you, and I hope I didn't rattle too much.